The approach oftentimes is to figure out what the connection between sales and product market fit is. And so oftentimes what you get is you get product having one definition of what they solve, marketing having another definition, and sales having another definition. And so that's the second step once you're rowing in the right direction. It's understanding how your customers buy and then building something around that. What a basic SWOT is, hey, what are we good at? What are we bad at? Where are our opportunities? Where are our threats? And everyone can do that and talk about that. And then the market thinks this about us. That's what we want the market to think about us. And we need to just talk about that more and more.
This is Edly Spotlight. While working on this podcast, I've had the privilege to interview engineers, product managers, designers, people who have a deep technical expertise. I also talk with dreamers, people who try to think about the next big thing. And then I get to meet business people who are squarely focused on growth. And I love this because the conversations are typically very different. Which is why I'm very pleased to have this conversation with you, Dan. You are Dan Greenberg, and I'm going to keep the intro short and sweet. You work to help organizations grow from one stage of their revenue to the next. You work both as a consultant and a full-time employee. So is that an accurate description of what you do?
Yes, it is. And first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I have throughout my career for the better part of a couple of decades, I've been in revenue driving roles, helping companies grow revenue, get to more advanced, more mature stages of revenue growth, scale their businesses. And as you mentioned, I've done it both in a full-time capacity and then lately in consulting and fractional capacities for a number of different companies across industries. I've spent most of my time in technology and business services and other services.
So let me ask you a very, very naive question. Why is this interesting? Isn't sales and revenue a solved problem by now? Don't we know how to grow a company? I told you this is naive.
It's not naive. It's not naive in the sense that so if we're trying to solve a problem in mathematics or engineering, there is an answer. There's a certain amount of inputs that if we get all the inputs right, we get the right output. And the same can be said in sales. The problem is because we're dealing with human beings, the amount of inputs are, let's say, approaching infinite. I'm not sure we could say infinite, maybe, but approaching infinite. And because of that, you have this situation where, the old question, or not question, but the old dichotomy, is it an art or is it a science? Well, conceptually, the science has to do with, if I do the right calculation, there will be a single answer. And in an art, there's no right answer. Whatever input you put in is what you think about it, and however someone perceives it is how they perceive it. Well, sales is somewhere in the middle, in the sense that because we're trying to get to a result, namely we want to make more money, we have to be able to do certain things in certain ways that we know work. And yet the inputs are so great that we can't even potentially calculate them. And so that there's a combination of art and science. And to me, figuring out how to do the things that we know work, while at the same time not confining ourselves to those things, because we're not in the world of pure science. That's what's interesting about it.
So what's your approach? You go in an organization. How do you, what are the first steps you take to identify what is blocking the company from growing to the next stage of their revenue?
The approach oftentimes is to figure out what the connection between sales and product market fit is. Companies by nature are siloed. This goes back as far as it goes back to, the division of labor. We can go back. Aristotle talked about it, 2,500 years ago. The idea that if you have people who are good at certain things, they should do those things. And the more they do those things and the other people who are good at other things do those things, the better off we'll be. But what happens is you have the product people building the product, and you have the sales people selling the product. You have the marketers talking about the product, and oftentimes you don't have a through line that comes all the way from how does this product really affect our market to how are our sellers selling it. We see this a lot in the consulting industry, where the consulting industry makes up these, flowery terms for, like, we help companies achieve, relevance in connection to this problem, and so on and so forth. And we use these flowery words to describe what we do. And in reality, when a salesperson goes to have a conversation, that conversation is very different, because the buyer is sitting there going, I have this very concrete problem that I need solved. And when it comes down to it, what they're selling is something that's much, much more in the box than the way that the company talks about it. And so oftentimes what you get is product having one definition of what they solve, marketing having another definition, and sales having another definition. And so my approach is to, first of all, highlight that. And this, by the way, this leads to a lot more concrete and process-oriented things, but this is the initial part of the approach. To first of all highlight that, and to get the organization on the same page, right? Everyone has to be rowing together. Once everyone is rowing together, then you start to say, okay, how do buying organizations perceive me? How do they think about this buying decision? Then you can start matching up organization and process to how your buyers buy. I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we go on, but a lot of companies say we're customer-centric, we're customer first, we're this and that. It's a very nice thing to say. The reality is, most of the time, I don't see that put into action. And so that's the second step. Once you're rowing in the right direction, it's understanding how your customers buy and then building something around that.
I'm so happy that you started the conversation with silos. I know that I spend a lot of my time breaking them, and it's hard. It's a hard thing. And you mentioned highlighting those silos. Personally, the way I do this is that I wait for people to trip. Oh, you see this failed miserably because there was miscommunication between those teams. Is there a nicer way to highlight those silos? Because people need to be convinced at some point. If they don't have a big issue, then they're going to be like, no, we've been doing this for a long while. It works perfectly fine for us. So why change?
I'm I love that you asked a question like that. I love the idea of allowing mistakes to educate. It's pretty much the best education anyone can get. I try to employ it with my kids all the time. I was just taking my kids to school this morning, and my daughter picked up my phone and asked me if she could play this quiz game on my phone. And I said, yeah. She kept asking me for the answer. And I said, no, get it wrong. And then you'll know better next time. Right. So I love the idea of allowing people to make mistakes. As a consultant, that's a little bit harder because you're paid to help them get it right. And so, so is there a nicer way? No. Without the mistake being made, I don't think that the organization will learn the muscle memory to get it right in the future. That said, you can help someone get it right in the moment. The question is then, how do you educate for the long term? And so I think there is a nicer way, but it's not as good of a outcome.
So assume you convince people, hey, there's an issue with how the different teams are not rowing together. Assume that. How do you get them to actually row together? How do you align teams? It's very difficult to have sales, product engineers, marketing people on the same page. They don't have the same schedule. They don't have the same priorities. Oftentimes, they don't use the same tools. So where do you start? Do you start with the tools?
So I'll talk about the way I do it, and I think that it's there are absolutely other ways to do it. identifying a problem, identifying a potential outcome, and conceptualizing how to get from one place to the other. Oftentimes there's only a couple of ways to do that. But then once you start to be prescriptive and you start to think about, okay, this is step A, step B, step step C, and so on, there are oftentimes many ways to do that. So I'm not by any means saying this is the way to do it. So I employ a 3-step process when I work with companies. I do this both as an internal employee and as a consultant. And what I do is I bring in leadership from each of the groups. So CEOs, in many cases, heads of product, heads of sales, heads of marketing. We can talk about the division between sales and marketing later because I have some other thoughts on that. But I bring leadership together in groups, sometimes as small as that group of 3 people, head of revenue, head of product, head of the company, sometimes in larger groups that include VPs and so on, but it depends on the situation. And I have a 3-step process. And the first step is around perception. And I used a model of a basic SWOT, which everyone has done, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But the way that I do it is I put a basic SWOT next to a perception SWOT. And what a basic SWOT is, hey, what are we good at? What are we bad at? Where are our opportunities? Where are our threats? And everyone can do that and talk about that. And then, but if you start to ask people, no, okay, that's fine. What does the market perceive your strengths to be? And when you start to ask that question, the immediate thing that happens is people start talking about their strengths. And I say, well, wait a minute. I didn't ask what your strengths are. I asked what the market thinks your strengths are. And again, people start talking about their strengths, and then you remind them again. And, it doesn't take long, but 5-10 minutes into the conversation, you start to get a real conversation developed about what the market thinks your strengths are, what the market thinks your weaknesses are, what the market, okay, so on. So when you juxtapose those two things, you get to this, the conversation naturally goes towards, okay, so are we saying that the market thinks this about us? That's what we want the market to think about us, and we need to just talk about that more and more. Or are we saying the market thinks this about us, but we're actually good at this? We need to change the way we talk about ourselves in the market. And that's where those conversations 99% of the time end up is a conversation between those two outcomes. So that's step 1. From there, I moved to what I call a branding exercise, where we literally just list out the things that are important to us. There's usually between 2 and 6 of them. And how the market expresses that problem that relates to that solution, and how we talk about that solution. We literally just write out, this is the sentence we're going to say when we're talking about this. This is the sentence that our buyer is going to say when they express that problem. And we get to a list of problems and outcomes. And by the way, I'm using the term outcome very specifically as opposed to solution. When we talk about solutions, we invite like, well, why doesn't it do it this way? Why doesn't it do it this way? What we need to be doing oftentimes from a marketing sales perspective is talking about where you're going to end up. Leave that there for. So that's the branding workshop. And then we move on to a prioritization workshop, because if you're going to focus on everything, you're going to end up focusing on nothing, right? And so what we do is we say, okay, here's all the different types of clients you could go after. If you had only $1 or one more unit of time or energy to use, what type of client would you go after? We list out, we say, this is the one type of client we'd go after. These are all the other ones.
So wait, this is for marketing or this is for sales?
Both.
Okay. So you want both divisions to be integrated, but both functions. Okay.
Yeah. This session is designed for sort of the ultimate focus, right? You can always branch out later. Once you get something and you're really working well, and you have said, hey, we know how to sell to this market. We know exactly what we're doing. We're seeing good results. We're able to scale it. You can always then say, hey, now we're going to start to work on another strategy. That's no problem. But the idea is when you work on a strategy, you work on it for one very specific path, right? So So you go, okay, what's the one type of client? And then below that, you can write out all the other types of clients that you'll deal with opportunistically. Like, I'm not going to spend proactive money or time going out to this cohort. Let's say cohort A is mid-sized businesses between 100 million and 200 million in revenue who are B2B, right? Okay, that's cohort A. I'm going to spend all my proactive money and dollars on cohort A. Cohort B, let's say it's exact same thing, 100 to 200 million dollars in revenue, mid-market businesses, but they're not service businesses, they're hardware technology business. That's cohort B. I'm not going to spend my proactive time, my proactive dollars there. But if one comes to me and says, hey, I really want to use your service, great, we'll talk to them. Okay. So we end up with this list of, this is where we spend our proactive time. This is what we do opportunistically. And this is the cohort we don't touch with a 10-foot pole because it's not worth our time. We don't want to do it. And we do that for type of client. We do that for type of buyer. I really want to be talking to COOs or VPs of HR or whatever it may be. We do that for what's the one internal issue that we need to solve from a business perspective. What's the one internal issue we need to solve from a product perspective? There's a list of these prioritizations that I walk a company through. And so what you come out with at the end of this is you come out with an understanding of how the market perceives you and what that means for your messaging, the way you want to say things over and over again, and the way you should expect to hear them from your client, and the way you can echo your client and use the same words as your client, and then the prioritization for what types of clients you want to specifically focus on and how you want to go about it. And those 3 sessions often get you to a point where you have a unified internal conversation. So there are more things to do after that, but to answer your question about the initial phase of the approach, that's how I go about it in those 3 steps.
Say you have identified cohort A as the one for which you should be really proactive. What's your typical outreach strategy, and how are you going to train your sales personnel to implement the marketing strategy that you defined for this cohort?
Yeah. So this is right, because chronologically you're pointing in the exact right direction. So what we just talked about is strategy, getting on the same page. And oftentimes what I do after that is take all the answers that we got from the 3 sessions and we build out I call it a business opportunity document. It's pretty synonymous with a revenue playbook. And the sections that are missing from that revenue playbook at that point in time are going to be methodology, process, and then tools and training. So that's the next 3 steps in the process. So methodology basically says, okay, we've taken a customer-centric approach by starting with how the market perceives us, going to how our customers talk about their problems, and then prioritizing those customers based on where we fit best. And by the way, one of the things that comes out of those 3 sessions is there's a triangulation that has to happen. We have to be doing something that's at the focal point of what does the market need? What do we do well? And how does the market perceive us? And that the third one is what gets missed often, right? Oh, the market needs this. We do this well. Great. That's what we sell. And if the market is telling us, yeah, we need that, and you say you do that well, but we don't believe you, it doesn't matter. We're not going to be able to sell, right? And so the third point is what's missing often in that triangulation. So through those 3 sessions, we get to that understanding of, okay, if the market needs this, we do it well, and the market actually believes us when we say we do it well, we're in a pretty good place. And that's how you build that customer-centric approach. So now we've done all that. Now we move on to methodology. Methodology says, how are our customers meeting us? How are we meeting our customers? So let me give you an example. I was at a company, and this is within the past 5 years. And they decided that they wanted to take a new approach to sales. In the past, they had had internal experts, internal consultants doing most of their selling. And they wanted to hire a team of professional sellers to come in and guide these experts and consultants through the sales process.
Can I ask where this need came from? They were not happy with consultants acting as sellers? Why not?
Revenue is declining significantly.
Okay, that's a good reason.
Yeah. Partially because they had no process or motion built in for how to sell, and partially because they didn't hire consultants who knew how to sell. And there are consultants out there who know how to sell, and there are those who don't. So they decide, hey, we need professional sellers to come in and help us. And they decided we want the professional sellers to sell, and then we want the consultants and the experts internally to grow business, manage business. And so we're going to segment it. We're going to have these clients managed by the consultants and these clients managed by the sellers. But we want everyone to work together. That was their, overarching thesis. And so the way it started to play out is this. A new client would come in through the work of the sales team, and the seller would be having a conversation with the client. And by the nature of not being an expert, the seller would go to an expert or a consultant and say, come and help me, which is good. Okay. And that expert or consultant would say, okay, how do we, because they were incentivized to sell too, how do we get this person to proposal stage or this client to proposal stage as soon as possible? Right? The problem is that the client, the sales team is there to do outbound. And when you do outbound, your clients aren't always ready to buy because you've told them you have a problem. They have not likely wrapped their mind around the fact that they have a problem yet, right? So there's a very long sales process when you go outbound because you are building a business case for the solving of the problem for that client. So the seller was bringing in the expert. The expert was saying, okay, I know how to build a proposal. I'm going to build a proposal. Okay. That's cohort number one. Now, cohort number two are the clients who are already in the realm of, working with the business, right? These are the clients who have bought in the past, who are currently clients, so on and so forth. And those are the responsibility of the consultants. And leadership was telling the consultants and the experts, we need to expand scope. We need to be selling bigger projects. We need to be selling deeper integrations and so on. And so these clients who are already working with the company would come to the consultant or the expert and they would say, I need to buy such and such. And the consultant would turn around and would say, no. That's not the problem. You actually need to think about this bigger problem that we can solve for you, right? And so what you have in the end is you have cohort A who's not ready to buy, and you're saying, hey, buy this. And cohort B who is ready to buy, and you're saying, no, I don't want to sell you this. I want to sell you something else, right? So when I talk about, and by the way, this is not unique to this company. This is a very, very common thing. We think about, and again, this is another example of not being customer-centric. This is a business saying, we want to sell deeper integrations. Therefore, we're going to sell deeper integrations no matter what our client needs. Or we want you to buy quickly. So you're going to buy quickly no matter where you are in the buying process. And this is what I mean by methodology. When you build methodology, you have to define cohorts of clients based on the channels that you are employing. And so if you're going and cold calling people and trying to explain to them that they have a problem, you have to be prepared to have a very long sales cycle and to educate that client and to work with that client on their pace until they are ready. And when you have clients who are coming inbound to you, and this is just another example, who have a defined problem and are telling you what they need, you have to be ready to not move them backwards in their sales process because they've already done most of the work. They're 80% of the way there. If you move them backwards, they're going to say, why do I have to do this all again? Right? And so you have to define your channels and your approach based on where your clients meet you and where you meet your clients. That's methodology.
Wait. I think I didn't get the moral of the tale. What happened to that a consultant who was moved away from the sales cycle, and the salesperson who was not so familiar with the actual product. So how do you resolve this this conundrum where how do you actually, well, I guess my question is, how do you become a customer-centric? And then how do you manage to resolve these situations where you shouldn't be focused on what you want to sell, but instead of what the buyer wants to buy?
So that is obviously the right question to ask, and it's going to be very, very dependent on the specific situation, which is not a good answer. But what I will say, is this. Right now, so we started by talking about strategy, and I talked about the 3 steps for getting to a unified message and a unified understanding, prioritization. Then we talked about methodology, which is about understanding where your buyers are when you meet them. From there, we're going to move to process. And from there, we're going to move to training and tools. As you move through this sort of consultative process of figuring out what your go-to-market orientation is going to look like, you're going to start to understand, and this is part of what I do, you're going to start to understand what that sales organization should look like. Now, in the very specific answer I just gave, my recommendation to the company, which they ended up moving towards in a very significant way, was having a standalone sales team was not solving their problem because of, let's go back to the early part of the conversation, because of silos, right? So the sellers were working with clients who weren't necessarily the best clients for them to be working with, and they were incentivized to do things that weren't necessarily the best for the clients. And the consultants, the same thing. They were working with clients who weren't always the best clients for them to be working with, and they were incentivized in ways that didn't make sense for the client all the time. And so the answer is, let's not have a standalone sales team. Let's create pods of individuals who are incentivized overall to grow a book of business. And then within those pods, you can employ certain individuals in certain instances to talk to certain clients based on the needs at that given time. And so what that means is if you have a client who needs to talk to an expert because they're not convinced of their problem yet, you probably want an expert or a consultant talking to them, solutions architect, whatever it may be. If you have a client who has already done most of the work of understanding what they need, you probably want a seller there to walk them through the process, right? But the point is that the siloing didn't allow for the right people to work with the right clients at the right time. So that's...
So what's the difference between a pod and a team? Is there any formal difference, or is it the same thing?
I would say, I know. So this is my definition. I don't know that this is, ubiquitous across, others who define this, but I would say a team's more general, in the sense that you could have a team of sellers. They all do the exact same thing, right? When I talk about a pod, I mean, you have a seller, you have a solutions architect, you have a consultant, you have a business development person, the different functions all together who are working incentivized in the same way to grow an overall book of business, so that each individual with a different skill set can be employed at the right time with the right client.
But is the team, the group of consultants who will actually perform the work at the end of the day, are they part of this pod, or is it a separate hierarchy?
Well, so this question is very specific to a service business, a consulting business, really. And in a consulting business, I would say the answer is yes, 100%, because clients want to have continuity between the sales process and the consulting process. And in fact, the best consulting firms bring the consultation forward into the sales process, right? And so the answer, I think, very much is yes for a consulting firm. SaaS companies, tech companies, so on, that the answer to that can be different.
Okay, and how do you bring up to speed with this sales strategy, this this unified customer-centric strategy? How do you bring this part of individuals up to speed? How do you train them? How do you make sure that they remain compliant with your strategy? How do you implement that?
So when you move past methodology, you get to process and tools and training. Process is a relatively mechanistical, I don't know if that's a word. It's
I get it,
relatively, yeah, relatively scientific in the way you lay it out. And, oftentimes, so many companies use Salesforce. And when you use Salesforce, you have sort of the basic out of the box Salesforce comes and it says, like basically first contact, discovery, scope, proposal, negotiation, close. That's, I think, the basic steps in Salesforce. 6 or 7 steps. In reality, you have about 35, 40 steps in a sales process, especially for long sales cycle or consultative selling. And those are things like buyer acceptance of problem, buyer recognition of problem, agreement between buyer and seller on problem, buyer recognition of the need for a solution. Sometimes they recognize they have a problem, but it's just not a high enough priority to solve it. Buyer recognition for a need for a vendor to solve the problem. Sometimes they may think they need to solve it internally. So if you go through all of those, steps within discovery and scope, there's actually a lot more steps in the process. So laying out process in a way that you can have internal conversations that make sense between management and sellers and consultants and experts and other people that are involved in the sales process is very, very important. If you skip steps, what happens is that buyer may say, yeah, we have a problem. You move to proposal, you put something in front of them, but the buyer hasn't even decided yet if they want to use a vendor or if they want to just build something internally. Then you're talking to a buyer about a solution and the buyer's not sure they need a solution and you're not going to have a very good conversation. And so you need to lay out your entire seller buyer process and you need to make sure that your sellers are trained on ticking all the boxes. That's the first part of training, but it's really the process piece. It's laying out a full process so that if your sellers are skipping steps, they are putting themselves in a position where they're less likely to be successful. And so laying out that process in a very, very scientific way and saying, hey, have you checked this box? Have you checked this box? Have you checked this box? That's the first piece of training, but it's really the process piece that sort of takes the methodology and makes it real. This is what starts to bring us down to earth, is building out that process. And then from there, you actually go to training, you go to tools, you figure out what tools best support your organizational structure. You figure out what types of training you should run. We can talk about training a bit if you want. That's sort of the next place to go. Yeah. So I was talking to a group of CEOs the other day, maybe a month ago. And I asked this from time to time, but I asked this group, I said, hey, just give me some of the thematics, some of the themes of the trainings that you run for your sales team. Like, for half of them, by the way, didn't run trainings, but the half that did, I said, what are the things that you do for your sellers? And, it was kind of silent in the room because CEOs aren't always in the weeds. And I kind of expected that. So they didn't have like the titles of the trainings. I said, that's okay. Let me ask you this. I said, are a lot of the trainings about differentiation of your product? They're like, yeah. I said, what else are trainings about? I said, are there trainings about your sales process? And they go, yeah. And I said, are there trainings about, your customers and how they solve their problems internally? And they said, yeah. And then, so I asked a couple of the CEOs, I said, actually, I'd love you to take a look through your training catalog. And the ones who had it looked through. And then I restated the question. So CEOs were assuming that they sort of trade across the board on a lot of things. And then I asked the question again, and it turns out, and this is the answer that you always get, that almost all of the training is about differentiators, right? Our product is better because of this. And when you're sitting there as a seller talking to a client and you start to talk about differentiators, it's all good and fine. But what do you think happens when you leave the room and your competitor comes into the room? What do they talk about?
Same thing.
They're differentiators. Right. Exactly. And so you get all these companies talking about, this is our differentiator. This is why we're better. This is why we're better. And if you're a buyer and you hear all of these, at the end you go, well, he says he's better because of this, and she says she's better because of this. It's actually worse than not believing them. It becomes white noise. It's completely inconsequential what you've said, right? It just doesn't matter, because the buyer can't sit there and place any judgment on your relative truthfulness or your relative ability to capture the problem, compared to anyone else that they're hearing. So it all becomes white noise. And so when we train sellers on differentiators, what we're doing is we're telling them to talk about things that buyers don't care about, right? And so, and by the way, I get in a lot of trouble saying this. There's a book out, there's a famous book out there called Differentiate or Die. And, so I sit there and I go, hey, differentiation doesn't matter. And people are like, what, are you crazy? I'm like, so there is a nuance here. The nuance is that differentiation does matter. Your company has to differentiate. Your sellers, if they start talking about why you're differentiated, that's where you get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, there is a long list of things that you need to be training sellers to do. You need to be training sellers to tick all the boxes in process, like we just talked about. You need to be training sellers to ask the right questions, to listen for the right wording, to understand how buyers are connected to the market. You have to train sellers to be able to give insights and to be able to challenge after they've talked. You have to train sellers to do a lot of things, but if 90% of your training is about differentiation, you're going to be going down the wrong path.
So I'm an engineer, so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about tools, and obviously how building tools and making tools has completely changed over the past 2 or 3 years because of generative AI. And I'm wondering if this has caused a real paradigm shift in how you change the structure of organizations to be customer-centric, or is this the same old tooling that we use? You mentioned Salesforce. Do the same old tools still work, or are we now able to have a step increase because of Gen AI?
Yes, we are able to have a step increase because of Gen AI. It's because of the relationship between people and tools that we can do that, though, not only because of the tools. And I think I'm not stating anything that's, not, sort of intuitive here, but I think there's an important sort of principle to understand here when thinking about this. And that is that right now, where we sit right now at this exact second, AI technology is revolutionary. But the outputs that we get from tools at this moment are only incrementally better than what we had. And that's for a few reasons that I can't really say that I fully understand. But it has to do with, number one, how people input information. Number two, how people get information out of the tools. And number three, it has to do with the fact that we're still ultimately dealing with a human-to-human problem here when we talk about sales. And so, I spent a lot of time in ad tech, and ad tech would do this thing where it goes, hey, the last thing that this person clicked on was on our site, and therefore you should pay us a bunch of money because they bought your thing, right? And well, the natural question is, so let's say we're talking about Google. I clicked on a Google link and I went and bought something, and Google's like, hey, last click, you should pay us a bunch of money. And the natural question is, well, I typed that thing into Google because I already decided I was going to buy it, right? So why should I pay you any money, right? That person figured out that they were going to buy that thing long before they ever went to Google. And you just happen to be the place that they can. So yeah, I should maybe pay you a little bit because without you, they wouldn't have gone to my site, but they already decided they were going to buy it a long time ago. So how do I figure out who influenced that person to buy the thing that I'm selling. Well, we can sit there in the ad tech world and we can go back and we can say, well, there was this click and this impression and this impression, and we can build a whole map of all of the things that and we can assign value to the first click and the last click and the middle click and this and that. But in reality, we can't read the person's mind, right? So the example that we used to give when I worked at the company formerly known as Twitter is because, Twitter was very focused on, immersive, like you're going to have a real experience when you're there, and we're actually influencing people. We're not a last click place. Anyway, someone goes and buys a Ford Mustang, right? And you're sitting there going, well, they got this information on Kelley Blue Book and they made this purchase. But the kid had a picture of a red Ford Mustang on his wall when he was 8 years old, right? And he cut it out of a magazine, and he's wanted a Ford Mustang ever since, right? So so you could sit there and make the argument that the real influence came from that immersive, right? But the whole point is that we can't read the mind of the person. So all of this work that we're doing to sit here and to say, let's put this information in the CRM and let's understand this and let's understand that. We're fundamentally solving a problem of human connection. How do the seller and buyer connect in a way that buyer trusts the seller and is willing to listen to that seller and be influenced by that seller, right? That's the only way we can actually change the end game. Otherwise, you have 5 sellers talking to the same buyer, and the buyer at the end is going to go back and make the decision with no influence from these sellers because he doesn't trust them, right? So that human connection is the only way that we actually accomplish something, and we give ourselves more of a likelihood to win the deal. And that comes, we can use AI tools. So to answer your question, we can use AI tools to help us position ourselves in a better way to be more relevant and eventually then more trustworthy. And the way that we use those tools is to gather the right types of information from those tools. And so it's about how we interact with the tools, not just simply what the tools can provide. So yes, there is the opportunity for an a step function improvement in the way that we relate to clients, but it's about how we use those tools to build connection, to build relevance, to build trustworthiness.
So again, taking the stance of an engineer, you're saying that Gen AI is providing only an incremental improvement over the sales process, because we haven't yet put together the infrastructure to use those tools properly. Even though these tools are, your words, revolutionary, we don't have the knowledge or the processes or the infrastructure to use them in an adequate way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
That's a bit of a shame, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because it's the same shame that we had when we had algorithmic tools, right? We had really good tools before this, and we didn't leverage them for the best use cases, right? So, it's funny because you have this image of like the great seller who's like kind of a prima donna who won't use Salesforce and, who goes about and does their own lone wolf thing. And it's true, some of those people exist out there and they are very, very good. And, but it's actually pretty illustrative of a problem. And that is that when you get really highly skilled people who build human connections, they're oftentimes not also highly skilled at using tools, right? Now, the dream, and you can tell me more than I can when this is going to happen, is that highly skilled seller or marketer, by the way, this goes for marketing too, because marketers who understand their market and know how to build a message for the right people, that's the same type of skill sets. The dream is to be able to have an interactive conversation with an AI tool in the very same way that you would with another person. And therefore, you're not inputting data, you're not taking data out, you're having a human conversation and then using that information to go to the market. that doesn't quite exist yet. So in the world that we live in, I need an expert at the skill set of sales or marketing, and I need an expert at using tools. And an expert at using tools has to liaise between the tools and the person, right? So I need that administrative coordination layer to really get full use out of the tools as they stand now.
But then we're still talking about a problem of communication between different functions, and it's this is a hard problem. I mean, getting salespeople to talk the same language at the same pace with tool builders. This is there's no easy way to do that. It's going to cost time to build anything that is effective.
So you're talking about tool builders, not the outputs of the tool now, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. It's going to take time. I think, there's a lot of optimism around AI, and I think it makes a ton of sense. I mean, the the things that the technology can do are mind blowing, right? But the optimism sort of passes over the fact that of exactly what you just said, which is that all of this amazing capability has to be synthesized into something useful. And useful is a sliding scale. So this is a really important point, I think, that people miss. Usefulness is a sliding scale, because as soon as you do something well and it's proven good, everyone starts to do it, and then you need to do it better, right? Customers, clients react to what's new relative to the rest of the market. So let me give you, I'm going to try to, here's one of the major flaws of AI technology, in my opinion. And it's not a flaw, I shouldn't say it's not a flaw of the technology, it's a flaw of how we're going to use it, because we're people and this is what we do. AI is going to tend towards genericism, right? It has to, by definition, right? Because the concept of an LLM is that an LLM goes and it says, what is the most likely thing that happens after this thing you just put in, right? That's how a large language model works. It says, okay, these 4 words are here. What are the next 4 words, right? And it's going to go and it's basically going to take a poll of the history of data. And it's going to say, this is the thing that comes next, which means that over time, if we are all asking it the same questions, we're going to get the same answers. And more than that, even more people are going to be asking it the same question because they've seen the same answers. And we're going to get into a cycle where we continue to get the same questions asked and the same answers given, right? And so one of the main problems right now with sales tools, you've gotten emails, LinkedIn messages that try to sell you things. When you open them up, what's your what's your first reaction?
I mean, I feel I have this very strong feeling of what you just described, genericity. I just read the subject and I know what's going to be in the text of the email, and so I just read it read through it and just click the spam button. It's instant.
Well, the fact that you read through it before clicking the spam button, that's even that's
well,
more than most people.
I don't read all the words. I just
yeah.
Yeah.
But exactly. So the idea is, and the thing that's important there is what you said is, I don't even know how I know it, right? But it's this feeling that it's generic. Because we are people, we're not LLMs, right? And so the large language model is doing something that is scientific and repeatable, and our brains don't work like that. And so it immediately flags for us that it's generic. And so you have these tools for a long time, these sales tools like Apollo and Sixth Sense, and they create messages and they're like, this is a personalized message. And technically it is. It says the person's name, it says their title, it says something that's relevant to them. But the language is still generic because it's being created by a machine. And we still have that problem with AI, right? So And we're still going to have that problem. And in fact, that problem is going to get worse as AI becomes used more and more often. And so what you're going to still need to do, in my opinion, in the future, certainly we might get to, 50 years down the road and AI might be so advanced that this is not a problem anymore. But, at least I'm talking the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, most likely, we're still going to need to be human beings, use the outputs of the tool and convert them into human relationships. And that's not going away.
Let me make your proposal right here and now, Dan. We'll sign a convention, send it to the UN, to all the Fortune 50 out there. Let's please use LLMs not for human-to-human interactions, only for machine-to-machine interactions, or only to support humans for human-to-human interactions, but then only in a support manner. Do we have like a first agreement on that before we send this to the UN?
Sure. And okay, who do you know at the UN that we're sending this to?
We'll figure something out.
Okay, good. Yes, we have. No,
but I see the same thing in engineering. Whenever an engineer generates some piece of code with Gen AI, then we can't use this piece of code as it is, and we can't really expect a human to fully review this piece of code if it's not reviewed by the initial author who used the LLM in the first place. So in that sense as well, the LLM should only be used to support the software engineer in producing the code. So I think this convention can go somewhere. Yeah, totally.
That's actually really interesting. I've never thought about that problem, obviously, because I'm not an engineer, but it has an incredible parallel to the problem that we're trying to solve in the sales world.
Yeah, and this really connects to some other conversations I had in the past with people in other functions, where Gen AI is used for self-reflection and for really a support tool, like triaging your email, giving you ideas on priorities to work on, ideas on how to implement a project. But then at the end of the day, they shouldn't be used for anything that will be sent to a human.
I actually want to connect this to something that we talked about earlier, and that is the concept of pods. What you said before is perfect. The idea that we should not be using, LLMs to communicate with humans. We should be using LLMs to communicate with other machines. But at a certain point, in order to make that output a reality, we need a human internally to interact with the LLM, obviously.
Yeah.
And so when we think about building pods, we need to think about how the tool is essentially a team member, right? Now, as we move from data output AI to agentic, systems, these tools will start to act more and more like humans, and that'll make things easier, but it's not going to solve the whole problem, as we were just talking about. But when you think about constructing a pod from a revenue perspective, from a revenue organization perspective, and you think about a marketer and a solutions architect and a seller and an administrator who's going to liaise between the tools, and then the tool itself, we have to be thinking about how that tool is actually a team member in the same way that other people are team members, but we're building that firewall so the tool's not interacting with the outside. We're having our experts be those interactors, and we're saving on cost because we can be much more productive. We can have one expert talking to many more clients because they're not spending their time inputting into Salesforce. They're not spending their time building messaging. They're not spending their time researching, because your coordinator is doing the research and the message building. Your tool is doing, and your coordinator is doing a lot of that input work. So building that middle layer and making the pod an inclusive unit that includes the tool, includes the coordinator, and includes the experts and the highly skilled sellers and marketers. That's what allows us to sort of leverage these tools as they are now to make us more efficient.
So, while I agree with the general vision, I haven't personally seen any organization which has managed to set up such processes, such agentic processes. Have you?
No, not yet. This is this is, how do I put this? If you go and you ask consultants, sales leaders, how they're building their sales organizations right now, you won't get, most of them won't talk about AI, and you won't get any sort of consensus on how to build AI into an organizational structure because we're just not there yet. It has not been conceptualized. I want to say there's no consensus, but that's not even, it's not, we're so far even, we're not even at the
Yeah.
point where we have competing opinions to have a consensus. Like there's no opinions out there. It's too new. And so, yeah, certain people have ideas. I'm going to use this AI tool for this individual team, right? But they're very localized and very siloed. And so there is no answer out there yet. I'm essentially saying, I think this is the framework of the answer based on my expertise in history and work with a lot of companies. But I'm not saying this has been tested. I'm not saying that this is, we're not there yet. This is my theoretical approach to the problem right now that I'm starting to talk to CEOs and companies about. It's getting good reactions, but we're so new that this is theoretical at this point.
Yeah, I think we still need to run many sort of experiments to see how we can use agentic systems, help those different functions work better together. It seems to me that in your ideal customer-centric organization, all sales, marketing, and even consultants people would be the same people. But then, is that a fair understanding?
By the same, you mean the same types of people we have in revenue organizations today would be in revenue organizations of the future?
Yeah. So the frontier between those different skill sets would be really blurred, and people who are able to do marketing would also be doing sales, would also be consultants, because at the end of the day, we want consultants to be able to we want the salespeople to be able to know the product very well, and so in an ideal world, these all would be the same. We wouldn't have to differentiate. We wouldn't have to go through this Taylorism that you described.
No, I actually do think there will still be differentiation in this sense. So I'll make 2 points in response to that. One is that if you look at your revenue organization today, all the functions that you have that exist today will exist in this framework. But we will need less of them to make the same amount of sales, and with the same amount of them can make more sales. In other words, we'll be more efficient. And the way that works is the efficiency that's provided by the layer of tools and coordination. So we're inserting this additional function, which is how do we turn the outputs of the tool into something usable for the highly skilled expert? And I'll get to your specific question in just a second. So we're adding that coordination layer. A coordination layer is now making our highly skilled experts much more efficient because they're only doing the things we want them to do. If we're paying someone a bunch of money to build human connections and have conversations, we want them doing that all the time. We don't want them spending 80% of their time using tools, inputting data, so on and so forth. So we're inserting this coordination layer to make these highly skilled, highly paid people more productive. And this is in sales and in marketing too. We're doing it across the revenue organization. So it's the same people, but the footprint is different. Each individual seller can handle more accounts. Each individual market can handle more cohorts, so on and so forth. But I don't think that we are going to blur the line between the highly skilled workers. The highly skilled workers, a seller who builds connections on a one-to-one with human beings, they're going to do that. A marketer who builds connections with large cohorts, they're going to do that. An expert who specializes in helping that seller with technical issues, still going to do that and still going to be involved in delivery. right? And those are going to be more business to business decisions. Like I said before, in consulting, you want those experts involved in the sales process. It's not necessarily always the case in other industries.
Okay, so the tools that will come up in the next years or so will only help with the throughput and productivity, but it will not fundamentally change the way we structure organizations. Is that what you're saying?
For the most part, yes. With one caveat, I think there actually is a fundamental structural change in what I just said. There's not a fundamental change in the functions themselves. So the same functions exist. But right now, what you have is you have a team of sellers, a team of marketers. You have what the fundamental change that I'm talking about is not a change in the functions. It's a change in how the individual functions relate to each other internally, right? So going back to that pod concept, what you have is you have a seller, a marketer, an expert, a coordinator, a leader, all rowing in the same direction and using the same tool, who's a part of that team, helping them drive a smaller book of business. I think what we can actually do is decentralize decisions in a lot of ways and actually bring the real decisions down to the pod level. Have you ever by any chance read David Marquette?
I haven't.
He's a very entertaining, but also very smart lecturer, I guess I would call him at this point. He gives speeches, he writes books. He was a commander in the U.S. Navy, a submarine commander. And he obviously he does a great job explaining it, but he took over a submarine and basically didn't know anything about the submarine. And all the people kept looking to him for answers. And he kept saying, well, I don't know the answers. And like, he needed to fix things quickly, but he didn't know. And essentially what his whole thing was like, how do I take power and diffuse it down to where information is, right? I encourage anyone, he has like a 10-minute YouTube video on this. It's really good and really entertaining. David Marquette.
So does it boil down to empowering pods or teams to take initiative and then sharing information then across these pods to make sure that everyone has shared context?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the foundational change. So it's not that there's no foundational change. It's that there's no change in the functions. But the foundational change is creating these pods that have the ability to make their own decisions about how to grow their books of business. And like you said, disseminate the information the right way. Yeah.
Okay. I think this brings our discussion to a close. Thank you so much. Really appreciated that. And I'll let you know about the UN thing. I'm sure it will get somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure being here.